The country's heartland is under siege.
Water was coming over levees and the disaster was underway.
Terrorized by raging rivers.
You could just hear the water. It sounded like a train coming.
Catastrophic floods drown the Midwest.
It just kept coming.
The nation mobilizes to fight the forces of nature. But the opponent is mighty. Homes crumble in the current. Towns are swallowed.
It looked like somebody had dropped a nuclear bomb.
The destruction is absolute. And many scientists believe that flooding will only get worse.
This is likely to become a fairly common thing in the future.
There is no way to reduce all risk. At some point, all levees will be overtopped.
The water doesn't care if somebody lives there or not. When you have a flood, the water's going to go where it's going to go.
On this episode of When Weather Changed History, epic flooding in the nation's heartland forces a dramatic change of course in the battle to control the Mississippi River. The Mississippi River Basin is one of the country's most important natural resources.
It's a transportation network for a lot of our agricultural products. It's a source of drinking water for some of our biggest cities. It's a recreational resource for people from all across the country. And for wildlife, it is an incredibly productive ecosystem.
80% of all the nation's crops are grown on the fertile land of the basin. The river itself is an artery of commerce. Every year it moves billions of dollars worth of agricultural and industrial products through the country and to markets throughout the world. Over time, elaborate systems have been created to control the river. Locks and dams to aid in navigation, levees like these to protect against flooding. With the man-made barriers in place, development flourished. Cities grew along the rivers with residents reaping the benefits. But sometimes protection is no match for nature.
What looks like very attractive real estate can very quickly become a very deadly place for loss of life and property.
June 2008. Weeks of rain threaten massive flooding throughout the Mississippi River Basin. Residents throughout the area gear up for battle against rapidly rising rivers. For many, the heavy rains are eerily similar to a weather pattern 15 years earlier. In 1993, a massive flood paralyzed 9 states in a deluge that is considered one of the worst natural disasters in American history. Widespread damage from that flood led to a major shift in the country's approach to flood protection and recovery. 2008 would be the first test of the new system that evolved after the Great Flood of 1993. Spring 1993. An unusual weather pattern plagues the upper Midwest. The jet stream, a narrow belt of high-altitude winds, stalls directly over the Mississippi River Valley.
We had a blocking high in the eastern portion of the country, so the storm systems never really would just move east and fade away. They would just keep reoccurring right over the middle portion of the country.
Rain drenches the Midwest at an alarming rate.
We had rain like 20 days almost in a row. As long as I've been doing weather, I had not seen anything like that.
Rivers are already high from a heavy winter snowmelt. By June, they near their limits. June 30th, the Mississippi River is more than 6 feet above flood stage in eastern Iowa. All locks are closed and barge traffic on the river is halted. Residents of Davenport evacuate as the Mississippi rushes into the city. President Bill Clinton comes to the city promising government assistance for the worried citizens and farmers.
We are going to ask that the producers here receive the same benefits
as the people who were affected by Hurricane Andrew and other major disasters.
170 miles west of Davenport is Des Moines, Iowa. The city rests at the confluence of two major rivers, the Raccoon and the Des Moines.
I think people had this kind of nagging feeling that we were getting in trouble, and they certainly had a nagging feeling that the rain just would not end. And the rivers, of course, were rising.
Fields and yards are drenched from weeks of nonstop rain and can no longer soak it in.
The soil just became totally saturated where any additional rainfall had nowhere to go. And, it didn't absorb into the ground. It was just running into the rivers. The rivers just kept coming up and coming up.
By early July, the Des Moines Reservoir is filled to capacity. Residents are concerned and confused. They wonder if there's any way to avoid the devastation of a flood.
If the rain doesn't come, the flood won't come, or the flood is coming without more rain.
July 8th, a storm lashes central Iowa. Up to 11 inches of rain fall in just a few hours.
We just couldn't handle that water. That was what sent us over the edge.
Water was coming over levees, and the disaster was underway.
Interstate 35 is shut down several miles south of the Ames exit. There's no way of getting across it.
July 10th. That night, the flood hits Des Moines head-on. Residents struggle to save their homes and businesses.
Water's coming through right there.
Yeah, I know. It's coming under the sandbags. That's all right there. Just have him dump that load right here, and we'll just shove it out.
The Des Moines Water Works is at risk. It is the source of drinking water for 250,000 people. The plant sits on the banks of the Raccoon River, protected by an earthen levee.
The National Weather Service forecast was that we were going to crest below our plant levee.
But by 10 p.m., the water line is already higher than expected and still rising. The night workers know they're in trouble.
The way the river was rising, we had to give at least some notification that there was some chance that the plant could go under.
It was almost sent a shiver down your spine. I remember picking up the phone and calling my family and saying, fill up the tub, fill up every container, fill up anything you can get before they shut the water system down, because we're going to have no water.
It finally got to the point when water was within a couple of inches of the top of our levee that we started seeing water rising, groundwater coming up inside the plant area.
July 11th, 3 a.m. The Des Moines Water Works shuts off power and evacuates. Water pours over the top of the levee and engulfs the plant. 250,000 residents of Des Moines now have no drinking water.
At that point, the National Guard and the other agencies were coming in with huge trucks of bottled water.
At the waterworks, engineers scramble to get the flooded plant running.
We actually floated in a boat to make an initial assessment, just what was underwater. So it was quite depressing as well as shocking.
It will take 19 days before clean drinking water is restored to Des Moines. But as the waters recede in Iowa, the trouble is just beginning further south. The massive flood steamrolls through the vast network of tributaries that make up the Mississippi River Basin.
We took all that water here, eventually moved it into the Mississippi, and just moved it downstream.
The people who live in the floodplains down south brace for battle. One of the worst disasters in U.S. history has only just begun. July 1993. Quincy, Illinois, a port city of close to 40,000 on the banks of the Mississippi River. Residents here are in a desperate battle against the rising river. Floodwaters rushing down from Iowa are now threatening Illinois. Alec House uses his helicopter to manage his 1,400 acres of farmland along the river just outside Quincy.
Things happen so fast.
tremendous rains up north, tremendous rains here, and the river came up at a very high rate.
House's land is behind a sand and earthen levee called the Snai that runs over 50 miles and protects 110,000 acres of some of the most fertile farmland in the nation. Ken and Sandy Krim farm the land on House's property. The high school sweethearts have been farmers all their adult lives. A month earlier, the Krims had just gotten their crops in the ground when the first major storm hit.
Big thing was June 30th of '93, we had a 6-inch rain basically up and down the Mississippi River Valley.
It was like a fireworks show. The grand finale, you know, how the sky is just lit up and just glistens and it just like it's never going to stop.
The rain pushes the Mississippi up 2 feet in one night. The river is now at 26 feet, just below the top of the Snai levee. Residents are at the mercy of the weather, and on the local news station, the meteorologist projects a grim forecast.
Some of the big boys in Washington are saying even that this pattern could remain in place possibly into mid or late August. It's a sad thing to report, and I'm sorry to do it, but that's the way things look for now.
And at that point, I think everybody collectively realized that this was going to be a different year and was going to represent probably a significant challenge. And that's when the call went out for bulldozers to push the back of the levee up to give us increased height.
Bulldozers skim sand off the back side of the levee and push it to the top. The goal? Raise the levee banks higher than the water is expected to rise.
The downside to that is by removing some of the sand from the back of the levee, it makes it thinner and hence it makes it weaker. But if you don't do that, it's going to come over the top.
Construction moves at a frantic pace along the 54-mile Snai. Plywood is added to increase height in areas where the levee is too wet to hold more sand. Plastic covers the top to prevent wave erosion. Then sandbags are placed on that. The Krims take their own precautions. They rent a vacant farmhouse on higher ground. July 7th, 1993. The river is at 28 feet. It is already at the height of the original levee, and the crest of water from the north is quickly approaching. The news radio station in Quincy broadcasts flood information around the clock. Calls pour in from people all over the country who want to help.
You're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Yes, what is the quickest way I can get to the Snai to work on the levee?
Yes, they do need help desperately. I can't reiterate that enough.
I'm calling from Concord, New Hampshire.
Oh, wow.
I have a week to 2 weeks that I could give you of my time.
We'll take it.
They had a massive sandbagging effort so that people could sandbag and in essence the safety of the parking lot at Quincy University or at the stadium, and they would bring the sandbags, you know, to us on the Snai.
Well, it's going pretty well. This has been a record day thanks to all the folks in Quincy that bagged this sand for us. This is our window of opportunity. We have to do it today because you know, the crest is coming.
Every day he was doing something on the levee, you know, repairing something, reinforcing something, monitoring. Levees were thoroughly saturated.
You were sad and anxious and still worried because not only was the levee a problem, your family was down there working on it. It was stressful, very stressful.
The pressure of the rising water begins to take its toll on the levees.
Levees are not dams. Dams are meant to hold water back for an extremely long time, decades, centuries. Levees are meant to hold water back temporarily.
July 9th, the Lima Lake levee, only 25 miles north of Quincy, crumbles under the force of the water. More than 28,000 acres of land disappear. Sheriff Robert Null is helping coordinate efforts to reinforce levees in the area.
You kind of draw back and regroup, and you say, okay, well, we lost that one, okay, but we're not going to lose any more, all right? We're not going to lose any more.
July 13th, the river crests in Quincy at a record 32 feet. Within a week, the river begins to overtop every levee north of the Snai. July 16th, the water rips through the levee across the river just north of the Snai in West Quincy. Barges are torn from their moorings and sent careening through the gash.
There was more than just the levee breaking. I mean, you know, when you see the thousands of people that were all of a sudden displaced, really displaced, and you've got a 7-mile stretch of water now, 7 miles of water, bluff to bluff.
With levees crumbling around them, Sheriff Null takes a startling course of action. He brings in an army of local prisoners to help sandbag the Snai.
To see that van pull up and the guards to get out, that, you know, when they got out and they were, you know, well armed, it's like, okay, I guess everything's okay. But they were a great asset.
It took several days of working to get to where everybody kind of figured, okay, we got a common cause here and we need to get to it.
Desperate residents mobilize alongside the prisoners in a final stand against the river. President Bill Clinton, after touring the devastation further north, calls into the local radio station to encourage the workers along the levee.
It's been an amazing effort. I just want you to know that we're thinking of you, we're praying for you, we're pulling for you. The rest of the country is determined, I think, to have the national government do what it takes to help you put your lives back together and get back on track here.
But area residents are exhausted. They've been battling the river 24 hours a day for almost a month, and the rain keeps coming.
There was no safety relief valve. There was nowhere else for the water to go. And at that point, Ken and I looked at each other. It was on a Sunday morning, and another crest coming, and I mean, what do you do? We're going to be next.
July 24th, 1993, Quincy, Illinois. The Mississippi River has crested at just over 32 feet, the highest level ever recorded there. Over 125,000 acres of land have flooded to the north. With more rain continuing to bring the river up, area residents Ken Krim and Alec House worry that the Snai levee cannot hold back the water much longer.
Ken and I were on the levee. There was no other levee north of us to breach, and the water was still coming up. At that point, I think both of us sort of knew in our heart of hearts that it was only a matter of time. But you keep going, what do you do?
July 25th. The Snai levee finally gives way on House's land.
It sounded like a train coming. It was just amazing. First time I ever seen actually a wall of water.
When it first broke, in one sense, you can take a breath because it's over. I mean, it had been close to a month, but a tremendous loss. I mean, all of that time and effort and everybody's hard work and dedication and devotion and selfless giving, and, you know, it's for naught.
The mighty river overtakes 44,000 acres of land, shutting down every bridge between Iowa and St. Louis. The fast-moving water submerges interstate highways and major rail lines. A week later, Ken Krim and Alec House go by boat to inspect the property. What they see is astounding. The Krim's home is under 15 feet of water. Their farm is destroyed.
If you lay awake nights and start thinking about, well, if we'd have done this or done that or whatever, why, you'd have went crazy. So I don't think there was another thing that could have been done that would have changed the outcome.
The hole in the Snai levee has grown almost a mile wide. But the flood is not over. The rush of water continues heading south, swallowing towns and knocking houses off their foundations.
Many of the low-lying levees, called agricultural levees, had overtopped already. We could foresee that this was going to happen all the way down the line. As the water would be rushing from the upper end to the lower end of the levee district, it would hop to the next one.
August 1st, 1993. The waters have reached the Harrisonville Levee District, 160 miles south of Quincy. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers comes up with a radical plan to stop the rush of water across the plains.
We decided that we would breach the lower end of the Harrisonville levee.
August 3rd. The Corps of Engineers digs out the side of a levee along the Mississippi just north of the historic town of Prairie du Rocher. The river rushes onto the floodplain and acts as a cushion, slamming into waters heading south and deflecting the water back out to the Mississippi.
It did exactly what it was intended to do. It saved the levee at Prairie du Rocher and probably the levees further downstream.
But left behind is a monumental disaster that would affect the entire country. From late June 1993 through the beginning of August, it had rained every day over parts of the Midwestern United States. But by the end of September, the storm is finally over. As the water slowly recedes from the cities, towns, and farms, the catastrophic devastation from the Great Flood of 1993 becomes apparent. The disaster is being labeled a 500-year flood, a flood so massive that the chances of it happening in any given year are only 0.2%. The water ravaged 9 states and took 52 lives. It destroyed 50,000 homes and displaced 70,000 people. Initial damage estimates reached $15 billion. Thousands of barges were stuck for months, costing an estimated $3 million a day. 15 million acres of farmland were destroyed by the flood. Some would be unusable for years to come. As residents return to their broken and waterlogged homes, the thought of rebuilding seems overwhelming. After the waters recede, Alex House and Ken Krim survey the farmland for the first time.
When the levee fails physically on your farm, you have the devastating consequences of every gallon of water runs over your farm, but you also get all of the sand from the levee. And by the time the water receded, we had over 300,000 tons of sand deposited on the farm.
The Krim's house has also been devastated by the floodwaters.
We walked through it, and there was about 4 inches of mud on the floor. All the walls, they were all covered in mud, smelled to high heaven.
With so much lost, the Krims question whether to rebuild or pack their bags.
You know, this is where our family is, this is our friends, and this is where the farm is. If you're gonna farm, it's here. If you're gonna go do something else, then let's go. And we decided to come back.
But around the country, some people wonder if rebuilding should even be attempted. For decades, the government has tried to prevent the Mississippi River from flooding. Man-made protections, such as levees and dams, have allowed increased development in the river basin. Environmentalists believe development in these areas has actually made flooding worse.
We have taken away about 80% of the wetlands in the Mississippi River watershed, so most of those natural sponges that used to be there to soak up water have now been paved over.
As a result, in 1993, the water from the heavy rains had nowhere to go.
And so you had basically an intense weather event on a system that had lost much of its ability to soak it up slowly, and you had it rushing through smaller rivers into the Mississippi with dramatic force and volume that was too much for nearly our entire flood protection system to handle.
In the past, the government response to a flood was to provide citizens with money to rebuild. But this time, with damages estimated at $15 billion, officials search for a new solution so taxpayers won't have to bear the burden of future bailouts. They come up with a radical new approach to flood protection. The best way to protect people from floods, they say, is to move them off flood-prone lands. But area residents like Alec House disagree. House believes increased levee protection can work. In July of 1994, House goes before Congress to make his case.
Our levee was the last to breach. We breached on the 25th of July. We flooded 45,000 acres. That was the first time that levee had been breached in over 100 years. I think that is an excellent testimony to the fact that flood protection does work. I was hopeful that the Senate would perhaps push some changes through. For example, levees could be more substantial, could be higher, could be maintained at the height that we finished with.
The Snai district, where House owns 1,400 acres of farmland, already has the resources to build its levee higher. But federal officials refuse to change the rules that limit the height of the Snai levee.
They wouldn't let us because that would put, in essence, Missouri or whoever's on the other side of your levee district at a disadvantage. I mean, that's the feeling. My position is both of us end up with the highest levee that we can to protect commerce.
With the proposal to raise the Snai levee denied, it is eventually lowered back down to its pre-flood height. In the end, the government pursues two courses of action. For areas that are already heavily developed, cities such as Des Moines, the plan is to strengthen the protection system. There, levees and flood walls are fortified and raised higher. But in the more rural areas, the government urges relocation. A voluntary federal plan known as the buyout program encourages residents to sell their homes to the government and move off flood-prone areas. The land will then be restored to wetlands or green spaces.
The idea being, let's not put a burden on the taxpayer, but let's minimize the risk. Let's remove structures and individuals from harm's way and put them in areas where there is less of a risk or no risk.
But turning millions of acres of farmland into wetlands could have a negative impact on global food prices.
Society as a whole says, well, we would much prefer to have all this marshland, and we're also willing to pay $5 for a loaf of bread. In one sense, I suppose that's a decision society has to make.
In areas where homes, not farms, were destroyed by the flood, however, the buyout program begins to catch on. One town where the buyout program takes hold is Valmeyer, Illinois. The small town, about 160 miles south of Quincy, had been decimated in the flood. Dennis Knobloch was the mayor of Valmeyer at the time.
It was the type of community where you weren't afraid to leave your doors unlocked at night.
When the river invaded Valmeyer on August 1st, residents were shocked.
I'm about 4 miles from the river, and it just never crossed my mind that it would ever hit my house.
But when the flood came, it swallowed Schillinger's 2-story farmhouse.
It was horrible, because I didn't know what was going to happen. If my house would be here when I came back, or exactly what was going to happen.
The water spread from the Missouri Bluff on the west to the Illinois Bluff on the east, about a 5-mile width, and we were basically part of the main channel of the Mississippi River during that period.
Lori Brown owned a ranch house in town.
We did take a boat ride and went out to where our house was, and all you could see was the peak of the roof sticking out.
After the waters had receded, Valmeyer residents returned to inspect their homes. What they see is beyond belief.
The ceilings had fallen down, mud, corn stalks, everything just was in there. I never did go down into the basement. It was nasty.
It looked like somebody had dropped a nuclear bomb. There wasn't a green leaf on any tree left in the town anymore. Everything that was still standing was covered with mud. It was not a pretty sight, and the smell wasn't much better.
If residents wanted to rebuild in the same spot, long-standing policies would require them to elevate their building like this one, a height that could be up to 15 feet in the air.
Putting 325 homes on 10-foot stilts didn't make a whole lot of sense to us.
It's hard to say.
Then, Mayor Knobloch decides to pursue a radical solution to save the town.
We knew the only way the town was going to survive is if we tried to relocate it.
Mayor Knobloch undertakes a feat never before attempted on this scale in America, moving an entire town. August 1993. The town of Valmeyer, Illinois, across the Mississippi River from St. Louis, Missouri, is virtually destroyed by the flood. Almost all of Valmeyer's 900 citizens will either have to relocate or may have to rebuild their homes on stilts. But Mayor Dennis Knobloch is about to undertake a leap of faith. At a town meeting, Knobloch shares with residents his idea to keep the community together. He wants to relocate the entire town. The move would be the first of this scale for a U.S. city.
We ask our residents, we're not sure what we're doing here, and we're going to be honest with you about that. But if you feel that you would like us as village officials to try to lead a relocation of the town, we'll do what we can to make that happen.
Consensus pretty well was that everybody wanted to stay in, keep Valmeyer a town and relocate. And so that's what they decided to do. We were really a tight-knit community, I think, and people just liked the way it was. We didn't want to lose that.
Hopefully next year at this time we'll have a lot of people back in their homes for Christmas.
Knobloch finds the perfect site, a cornfield up on a bluff only a mile outside the old town, but 400 feet higher up. Residents pick lots through a lottery.
We had tractors with wagons behind them and straw bales, and you got to take the tour, and that's how you picked out the lot you wanted.
Committees are formed to do everything from designing the town layout to picking street names. By April of 1995, the new Valmeyer is complete. Residents can finally come home. Part of the government restrictions require that the buildings in the old town be demolished and the land turned into park space.
Some of it, we just keep the grass mowed and keep it looking nice. Some of it we've used for our youth sports programs. And like here to my right, you see one of the areas that we've allowed to be used by some of the area farmers and is now sporting a soybean crop. So multiple purposes.
But not everyone in Valmeyer wanted to move to the bluff. Susan Schillinger, along with 14 other households whose homes were not totally destroyed, chose to remain in the old town.
I bought this house. I committed myself to it, and I was not going to have it destroyed.
She is concerned about future flooding, but is willing to take the risk.
Anytime the newspapers or the TV stations say the word flood, it gets my attention. I mean, and I'm sure it always will. "15 years after that disastrous summer, heavy rains bring the word flood to the headlines once again. May 2008. Meteorologist John McLaughlin begins to notice weather patterns disturbingly similar to those in the spring of 1993.
Now, I remember going into the newsroom and talking to some of the news people and saying, you better start gathering your animals 2 by 2 and building your ark, because this is starting to look exactly like 93.
The jet stream is stalled with a blocking high in the east, and the rain continues to pound down on Iowa. Rivers once again swell to their banks. June 12, 2008. In Cedar Rapids, Iowa, the Cedar River bursts through its levees. By the next day, it's 19 feet over flood stage. Downtown Cedar Rapids is buried underwater. 25,000 people are displaced.
The damage from the water is astronomical. Cedar Rapids had remained mostly dry in 1993 and had made no major improvements. But this disaster forces the city to consider the new measures already taken by those communities harder hit in '93. Many residents in Cedar Rapids would now be offered home buyouts and encouraged to move elsewhere. The floodwaters continue to rush through Iowa's rivers. In Des Moines, about 100 miles west of Cedar Rapids, residents are ready and waiting. They hope that changes made after the 1993 flood will help them stay dry.
I mean, we're better prepared because the levee systems were improved after 1993, and disaster plans were written.
New flood protection systems, including higher levee walls and floodgates, had been installed throughout the city. Officials at the water treatment plant have taken extra precaution. 15 years ago, the river invaded the plant and cut off water service to 250,000 Iowans for 19 days.
We were nervous only because many of us were seeing this for the first time since '93. And you always hold your breath after going through the event that we did in '93.
After the flood, the plant added 6 feet to their levee, additional pumps, a new floodgate, and a backup plant further upstream.
That provided a lot of sense of comfort, but still, it still had some anxiety.
June 14th, 2008. Floodwaters rush through Des Moines and crush a weakened levee flooding the Birdland district only 5 miles away from the water treatment plant. 270 homes and businesses in that area are flooded. Water surrounds the treatment plant, but the levee holds.
We experienced something under our new levee system that we had not seen before since '93, and the improvements proved to work out beautifully.
It was, in some cases, a true test of a system that had been improved, and with some notable exceptions, you know, the system worked and vastly reduced the damage in Des Moines.
The flood of 2008 is not over as it leaves Iowa. The rising waters push relentlessly toward Quincy and Valmeyer, Illinois. The course of events feels all too familiar to those who live along the river.
It is sort of the deja vu all over again. 15 years, later, a little more gray hair. You gear up and go. You don't have a choice.
Residents there prepare for disaster. June 14th, 2008, Quincy, Illinois. The river is close to 6 feet above flood stage. Efforts to raise the levees are in high gear.
We knew it was coming our way, but we had a lot more time to prepare than we did in 1993.
The Crims move out of their house for the second time in 15 years.
I was anxious because I'm 15 years older than the last time I did this, and I wasn't real sure I could do it again.
But the battle tactics are improved.
We learned to do things a little different this time. We were fighting bulldozers and dump trucks, where in '93, essentially everything was handwork.
The crest of water continues down the Mississippi. 2 levees crumble 40 miles north of the Snai, flooding close to 30,000 acres of land. But this time, the levee breaks further north help to relieve the pressure on the Snai. As the river begins to drop, hopes rise. The Snai levee is holding.
We learned techniques, and we're better organized in 2008 than we were in 1993. All those things, add up to winning as opposed to losing.
June 16th. The storm pattern has moved on. South of Quincy, the floodplains that used to be Valmeyer have stayed dry. But still, residents in the new town on the bluff take comfort in their decision to move.
It's definitely sad that we had to go the direction we did and abandon the place that we had lived before, but still, when we see some of the things that are happening now to some of the other floodplain communities,
I still feel we made the right decision.
With development likely to make flooding worse in the future, there is concern about the effect on the nation's food supply. 2008 estimates suggest that agricultural losses in Iowa alone could total almost $3 billion.
How do we prevent this from happening again? I guess the short answer is we don't, but we certainly can look at how we can mitigate the damage, which is kind of what happened between 1993 and 2008.
Clearly, the acquisition program has proven to be beneficial. Many areas that could have been flooded this time around that included homes or structures or residences, those no longer existed there.
The two massive floods have made clear that in the wake of such powerful storms, no flood control system can hold back the river.
We've spent the last 150 years and a lot of money trying to outthink this river, trying to engineer this river. And I think we're starting to realize that maybe the smartest thing to do is just to let the river be the river, try to get out of its way.
For those who choose to stay, life along the river is a gamble.
I don't think you're ever going to control the Mississippi River. I think you're naive to think that you can. Can we minimize the negative impact that high water has? Yes. And I think that's the balancing act.